Hi everyone, my name is Kerry Leeson-Beevers and I'm the National Development Manager for Alstrom Syndrome UK. I'd like to start by thanking the conference organisers for inviting me to speak today. The title of my talk today is Meaningful Engagement with Patients and Their Representatives. So I'm going to run through a few different points. So first of all, I want to start by giving you my personal perspective of living with a rare disease and share the story of me and my family and our experiences of receiving a diagnosis of a rare condition for my son when he was around 2.5 years old. I'm then going to talk you through Alstrom Syndrome UK and the journey of our patient organisation in the UK, how we started and how we came to develop multidisciplinary clinics in partnership with hospital teams in Birmingham and in Torbay. I'll then move on to talk about how we work in partnership with clinicians and pharmaceutical companies, but also with other patient organisations throughout the UK and beyond. And then talk about our involvement about patient involvement throughout the life cycle of drug development and how we developed our knowledge and understanding of drug development and how we use that to get to where we are today. We still have a long way to go, but we've come a long way since the start of our patient organisation. I then want to talk to you through the Kion's initiative, looking at patient involvement in the development and safe use of medicines. And finally, to share some understanding of why it's important to involve patients and their families and to listen to what's really important to them when developing new medicines. So to start then, I'd like to introduce you to my son, Kion. Kion's now 19 years old, and as you'll be able to see from the pictures on screen, Kion had a very, very difficult start in life. He was in heart failure at a very young age. Before we even knew what life had got in store, we didn't have a diagnosis at that point. But obviously it was a very scary time for us, and we've been through a lot over the last 19 years. So just to start at the beginning, so Kion was my first child, so I had a very healthy pregnancy and everything was fine when he was born. But then at 3 weeks old, he collapsed in heart failure. And this was thought to be some kind of virus that entered his heart, but it was never something that received a firm diagnosis. They never found out what the virus was. Thankfully, he recovered, and 2 weeks later, we were allowed home. But he collapsed again at 4 months old, and at that point, we were told that he'd got dilated cardiomyopathy. He spent a month in hospital, well, we spent a month in hospital, and we were told at that point that the only answer to Kion would be a transplant, a heart transplant. But thankfully, he recovered again and he was allowed home. Life was very difficult. It's not what we'd expected. At that point, I didn't expect to have a baby being so unwell. It wasn't something I'd prepared for, but we got on with that. Thanks to the support of my family, we got through that difficult time. But at 6 months old, Kion was diagnosed with cone rod dystrophy, nystagmus and photophobia, so he became extremely sensitive to light. So because 2 major organs were affected, that did prompt a referral to the genetics department, and they did blood tests, and we were told that it could take up to 18 months for us to get a diagnosis. We had numerous admissions to hospital with various chest infections and pneumonia, and at 12 to 18 months, that's when we found Alstrom Syndrome UK. Looking at the symptoms, the geneticist told me that, it could be Alstrom syndrome, it could be another condition, and I did what most parents do and went on to Google and looked at the symptoms and felt that he did fit the Alstrom diagnosis. So I contacted the charity and they did refer us to Birmingham Children's Hospital, who did make the diagnosis of Alstrom syndrome. So over the next few years, we battled with obesity. Kion was extremely overweight for his age. He was later referred severely sight impaired, and he lost his vision completely age 15. He's now got severe hearing loss and wears hearing aids in both ears, which he's very reliant upon. So he's now got dual sensory loss. He had scoliosis, which needed surgery, and he had his spine surgery on the 1st of March in 2016, another very scary time for us, but thankfully he recovered from that. He needed the support from a respiratory specialist early on in life when he had recurring chest infections, and he's needed support from physiotherapy and occupational therapy. He finally received a diagnosis of social and emotional developmental delay after, suspecting he could have possibly have autism. But the diagnosis of social and emotional developmental delay was really good for us because it helped people around him to understand Some of the things that were particularly important to Kion, he really needed routine, and obviously being a child with dual sensory loss as well, that was particularly important. But it was the first time somebody actually did an assessment on Kion when they did a holistic assessment and really considered all of his needs and put that into some kind of a report that people at school and other health professionals could really understand the kind of challenges that we were experiencing as a family. Kion's now had to have a referral to neurology because he's having some absent seizures, and he's also been diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. He's insulin resistant, and we've managed so far not for him to develop diabetes, but I'm sure that will come at some point down the line, as I'm sure there'll be much more to come. Alstrom syndrome is an extremely rare and a progressive condition, and it's something that we've had to learn to live with, but it's a constant challenge and a constant battle. So the impact of Alstrom syndrome has been huge on us as a family. Starting off for me as a parent, not something I expected, but more so, that's something that my son has had to come to terms with, and my other son, and the rest of the family. So we've needed multidisciplinary care from being a child. Kion has had from being a baby, he's had numerous different professionals involved in his care. And, getting to grips with dual sensory loss, he's needed a lot of support from sensory support teams. And, he needs a lot of support with his mobility, getting around, the way that he's accessed the curriculum. He's needed lots, of technology and expertise from people in the field to be able to support him. We've constantly had to manage his diet, and that's the one thing that Kion has always struggled with. He loves food, and he does make really healthy choices. But obviously, as he's getting older, that's becoming more challenging. The more control he has over what he eats and how much exercise he does, that's something that he constantly battles with. It's a very complex and progressive disease, and the outlook is very difficult because Kion, there is no cure for this condition, and I don't ever think there'll be a cure in Kion's lifetime. Hopefully there will be at some point, but coming to terms with that is very difficult for me, but especially difficult for Kion. There's very little knowledge and awareness of Alstrom syndrome, and it's getting better. I don't expect everybody to understand everything about every rare condition. I do expect professionals, looking after Kion to learn about Alstrom syndrome if he's in their care. But I understand that knowledge is limited, time is limited, and it's very difficult for everybody to understand every rare condition because there are so many. As I say, there's no cure for Alstrom, and there's no game changers on the horizon. We've had a couple of clinical trials that unfortunately haven't been successful. We were thankful to have clinical trials for such a rare condition, but we are hopeful that as things are developing, there will be something in future. We always have to have hope. It can be very isolating living with a rare condition, for me and for Kion and for the rest of our family. There are certain things that Kion is not able to do. He's very very stuck on his routine, and there's certain things that he just won't do. But we are very lucky in that he's a very outgoing young man. He's very confident, and he has got a lot of good friends around him, but it was very isolating when he was growing up. Helping Kion to understand his diagnosis has been a very big challenge of mine. I've been adamant from very early on that he needed to understand his condition, not because I wanted it to define him and I wanted it to control him, but I didn't want to hide things from Kion. I wanted him to learn the importance of diet and exercise and why he needed to do that and how that could help him be as healthy as possible. But it's very difficult explaining to a child that he's got a condition that means he's going to lose his sight, he could potentially lose his hearing. He knows that it's a life-limiting condition, and coming to terms with that for a young man is very difficult, and I can't begin to tell you how proud I am of the way that he's coped with that challenge. And in all that, I need to manage my own thoughts and feelings. I've constantly used to live in fear when he was younger, and still do now, I suppose. I know, this condition is is very difficult to come to terms with, and we have learned to live with it, and we've learned to make the best of life and to really enjoy life and embrace it. And I think while it's been very difficult to come to terms with Alstrom syndrome, and it's not what I expected my life would be and Kion's life would be, there are positives in there as well as the negatives. And Kion and working within Alstrom syndrome has taught me a hell of a lot in life. And you know, we've come to terms with that, and this is our life now. And as I say, it's not all negative. There are lots of positives too. So Alstrom Syndrome UK is a charity in the UK that was established in 1998 by two parents. The clinical team in Torbay Hospital, who managed the care of these two patients in Devon, really wanted to understand the condition in more detail. So they began to see patients from elsewhere and to try and find other people from the UK with Alstrom syndrome and beyond, to try and see if there were improvements that they could make in the way that they cared for their two patients. Birmingham Children's Hospital came involved because the patients in Torbay were adults at that time, and we wanted to get the Children's Hospital involved, so because there were children elsewhere in the UK that needed support as well. As a charity, we applied to the National Specialised Commissioning Group, as they were called then, to try and develop some specialised multidisciplinary clinics within the UK. But we used something called the Compact at that time, and we fought to be funded as equal partners in that service to make sure that the clinics remained patient-led. So we wanted a centre of excellence within the UK that patients could go to for their clinical care, but we wanted to work alongside that team as well to make sure that we could support those families, provide the support, and we held the database of UK families. So we challenged the NHS to recognise our importance in that role, and we were eventually funded as equal partners in that service to provide multidisciplinary clinics. So we are now equal partners. We did have to move the adult service away from Torbay because of the complexity of the condition, and we needed there were more elements to the condition that we needed to bring in. We needed some specialists in different areas. We needed the cardiac MRIs, we needed the lung specialists, we needed the transplant teams. So we then moved the service to Birmingham Queen Elizabeth Hospital for our adult patients, and obviously we had the Birmingham Children's Hospital for paediatric patients. But thankfully the team at Torbay were absolutely fabulous in getting those clinics established, and have still stayed involved with Alstrom syndrome to this day to share their knowledge and expertise, and we're very grateful to them for that. So as I explained, so we have paediatric clinics in the UK, and all patients in the UK are invited to attend on an annual basis. And this is a range of specialists that they see in clinics. So there's a huge list there: endocrinologist, clinic coordinator, diabetes, geneticist, cardiologist, dietitian. The list is huge. And when they come to Birmingham, they have a range of different tests as well: bloods, height, weight, echocardiogram, ECG, eye tests, hearing tests, chest X-rays, FibroScans. So obviously that's a lot for patients to do when they come to Birmingham. But they stay overnight and they have those tests done within a day and have their consultations. Obviously, we're having to change that at the minute with coronavirus, and we're having to adapt to telemedicine clinics, which in itself is very challenging, particularly for families where a child has got dual sensory loss. So our adult clinic's very similar, but obviously with it being a progressive condition, there are other specialists we need to involve and other more tests that we need to do for adult patients. So we do cardiac, liver MRIs, chest CTs. So we do have some adult patients that are on dialysis, that have had transplants. So it can get quite complex. But again, adults are invited on an annual basis to come to clinic as well. So I've told you a little bit about Alström. So I think probably the only thing I haven't told you is how rare Alström is. So there are only 86 cases of Alstrom syndrome in the UK. So we are very rare, but we do a lot as an organisation. We have a team of family support workers. We, as I say, we have the contract with NHS England, we have contracts with pharmaceutical companies, and we were involved in different initiatives in the UK and work more generally within rare diseases. So our partnerships, we have the partnerships with the team in Birmingham, as I've discussed, for the highly specialised service. So our role within that is to coordinate the clinics. We support the hospital with the coordination. We provide advocacy, and we link the specialist centres with local service providers as well. And our role within NHS England audits is to make sure we give feedback from the patients. We're constantly evaluating the clinical service and looking at ways to improve that, and we work together as a team to do that. We also have a research collaboration where we work closely with our clinicians, but also with researchers as well. We managed to get some funding from Big Lottery, and we developed a tissue bank. We're now developing a patient registry, and we've worked with the clinical team to publish clinical guidelines as well. So we're very thankful that we've got some research going on in Edinburgh University, where we've now got a mouse model in the UK, which is something we've wanted for some time. There are mouse models elsewhere, but we're now fortunate to have one in the UK. And the researchers work very closely with our clinical team as well. So it's, we're very pleased that we've got that link there between the research and the clinical team, and obviously our involvement with the patients, and can make sure that any research is patient-led, and we can look at the priorities of patients as well as the priorities of researchers and clinicians as well. We have partnerships with other patient organisations, so we lead the Breaking Down Barriers project, which is a network of 30 patient organisations working together to develop supportive and inclusive services. So we look at how we can support other organisations to improve their engagement with people from ethnic minority communities, to make sure that they're involved in getting access to accessible information, and that they can have access to clinical care, and also to take part in research. There are many health inequalities that have been highlighted through the coronavirus pandemic, and it's something that we've been working to challenge for a number of years now through the Breaking Down Barriers project. So it's obviously something that we're very keen to be involved in and to pursue further, to make sure that all people affected by rare diseases are supported and have their needs met, but that they can also contribute to research and clinical trials. I'm also a member of the UK Rare Disease Policy Board. So we've obviously, there been in 2013, there was the strategy for rare diseases, which is now coming to an end at the end of this year. And we're developing a new rare diseases framework. So I'm one of the patient representatives on that board, and involved in other initiatives within the UK to make sure that the needs of rare disease patients in the UK are highlighted and addressed. And so it'd be very interesting to be involved in this moving forward, to see how research is also included in that rare diseases framework, because obviously that's one of the things that rare disease patients want. We want new medicines, we want new treatments, as well as other issues around coordination of care, increase in diagnosis and things like that. So rare diseases framework is something that can pull all of those things together. Our partnerships with pharmaceutical companies. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have had 2 clinical trials, and we've had contracts with those pharmaceutical companies to support those clinical trials. So we can support with some of the logistics of that. So we help looking at the protocol, looking at the information sheets, consent forms, making sure that they're in plain language, making sure that we can support our patients to fully understand that, so that they're making informed choices of whether they want to be part of those clinical trials. But then also making sure that the clinical trials are accessible to patients as well. Obviously, having a dual sensory loss, clinical trials can be quite challenging for a lot of patients, but with trials that may need frequent visits to hospital, and traveling long distances, regimes where they may need to inject, and they may live on their own and not be able to do that, we can explore that further and look at the kind of support that patients may need, so that they can continue to take part in a trial. We also take part on advisory panels. So I work with pharmaceutical companies to look at their how they engage with patients, and to offer advice on how they can improve the materials that they're producing, particularly around benefit risk, and looking at the information they're sharing with patients and how they can be improved. And I'm also involved in the Kion's working group, which I'll explain more about later. So patient involvement throughout the life cycle of drug development. When I first became involved in Alstrom Syndrome UK, I had very little understanding of drug development. So back in 2008, I attended the Eurodis summer school, which was really beneficial to me. A lot of it went over my head at the beginning, but it was a really good starting point for me to develop my understanding. And then in 2010, I attended the advanced session as well. From that, I moved on to I went to be a patient representative on the Paediatric Committee at the European Medicines Agency, but then I had to leave that when we then started to work with pharmaceutical companies. I wasn't able then to stay on the Paediatric Committee. I joined the European Public Affairs Committee with Eurodis and a patient engagement group with Genetic Alliance UK, and that's where I started doing more general work with around rare diseases rather than just focusing on our own condition. I took part in a research project. I was a member of the patient think tank for the Astro project, which is looking at advances in small trial designs for regulatory innovation and excellence. And I was a patient representative on the UK Rare Disease Policy Board, as I mentioned. I've gone on now to be co-applicants in various different NIHR research projects, and that's mainly looking at making sure that PPI, patient public involvement advisory groups, are representative of the patients as well, and obviously we can bring in our expertise through the Breaking Down Barriers project to make sure that they are the panels that we're able to help support research studies or diverse panels. As I mentioned, we then went on to have contracts with pharmaceutical companies and take part in the Kion's working group. So I think, as I mentioned, we understood that although there was no treatments for Alstrom syndrome right in those early days, we knew that we had to develop our understanding of drug development if we were going to be in a position to be able to advocate for the need for research and drug development for Alstrom syndrome, but also if we got to that point to be able to support patients through that, which we did manage to do with 2 clinical trials. As I say, disappointing that those drugs didn't make it, but it's still important that we were able to support our patients through that. So the Kion's initiative is, the working group is looking at patient involvement in the development and safe use of medicines. And I've provided a link there so you can go onto that website to find out more information about that. So it's a guidance document really that's going to be useful to patient representatives, to industry, academia, regulators, in just showing how patient involvement can be very useful in drug development, because I think people now often know that it's important, just not sure on how to do it, and hopefully this guidance document will be able to provide some useful insights to different people to show how that can be done. So finally, I just want to talk through why it's important to understand, what is important to patients and their families. First of all, the first thing I would say is you need to ask them. Because it's really important that you understand what is important to patients right from the very early days of drug development, really. So by finding what outcomes are important to patients and their families, and being aware that priorities may differ, priorities between different patients may differ, but also between patients and researchers. So I think it's making sure that that is discussed in very early days. Considering the potential improvements in health, but also considering quality of life as well, what is important to the patient. Identifying and addressing any barriers to participation in research and support to include people from ethnic minority communities. Often people will say that it's very difficult to involve people from minority ethnic groups. So working with the organisations such as Breaking Down Barriers, where we can look at how we can break down some of those barriers and make sure that the panels that people are accessing are a diverse panel and representative of the patients at their target audience, really. And there is an expectation now that researchers engage in PPI, but I think there is a lack of clarity as to how that can be done, and hopefully the guidance document will help with that. But patient organisations now are becoming, this is something that they're often doing more regularly. So, I would say try and engage with some patient organisations. So just a few top tips. Involve patients and or representatives in all stages of drug development. And that positive engagement from an early stage really can support with recruitment and retention in clinical trials. There's no point in developing a protocol that just isn't accessible to patients. You know, a few tweaks in those early days may make a lot of difference, and involving people like patient representatives, patient organisation representatives may help you to understand the needs of those patients and to realise what is accessible and what isn't. Patient organisations often understand and can advocate for the needs of their community, and you know the importance of involving PPI advisory panels, but those panels need to be representatives of the target audience. So manage expectations from the start, be open and be transparent. I think it's very clear, you know, not all clinical trials result in a drug that's particularly useful. I think so it's really important to be open and transparent and to help manage expectations from the beginning. Accessibility is key, and patient organisations can help you with this. So again, it's looking at the trial design. Is the information you're producing in plain language? Thinking about the materials that you're using. If your patients have got visual impairment, do you need to produce audio materials, braille materials? Do you need to provide information in languages, in different languages? Patient involvement should not be tokenistic, and the patients will see straight through you. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise, and meaningful engagement does require commitment from an organisation. There are some fabulous individuals working in different organisations, but unless you get a buy-in from an organisation, you know, chances are it won't work. It's really important to plan, monitor and evaluate PPI, you know, to identify areas for continuous improvements. It might not be perfect, but you may be able to make tweaks so that you can make improvements. Training is often required for patients. As I say, I did the Eurodis summer school. There's lots of patient advocates doing things like UPATE. But it's not just training for the patients. The researchers need training too on how to engage with patients, and thinking about the funding involved, placing value on the input from patients and their representatives, and looking at appropriate reimbursement for the time and expertise that patients and patient representatives are giving. Something I just want to touch on very briefly is the involvement of young people. It's an area that I'm particularly passionate about, obviously having a 19-year-old. And very challenging. It's, you know, my views differ to his views, and so I think it's very important that we do involve young people. So there are young people advisory groups that can support with developing information sheets and informed consent, but also bearing in mind that some young people don't understand a great deal about their condition, and so if they don't understand it, then how can they be expected to understand what's required and what's involved in a clinical trial? As I say, priorities may differ between parents and child, and as I say, as my son's got older, our views differ quite a lot now, and I lack the control now that I had when he was growing up, because he's making his own choices, and rightly so. I've always wanted him to be an independent young man, and I have to accept that his views are going to be different to mine now. And parents often need to protect their child. So as I say, I've been quite open about the condition with my child, but I completely get the parents that want to protect their children from finding out that, you know, the true extent of their conditions, and that can be difficult to explain. And just to remember that surveys, there are a place for surveys, but they're not always successful. Surveys are often designed by adults and they're not always effective. You know, there are things to, you know, consider using technology and accessing people that have the expertise and engaging with young people. Because if you can engage directly with a young person, the information you can get from them is invaluable. And the final thing I want to say is feedback is crucial. If you're going to engage with patients, hopefully you will, you need to provide feedback. You need to show patients how you've used their information and their feedback to be able to make developments in clinical trials. Say what went well, say what didn't go well, but feedback, and really let people see how they've helped contribute to new developments. And finally, I'd just like to say that patients and their representatives have a great deal of knowledge and experience, and many are willing to share this to aid the development of new treatments. Let's find positive ways to work together. So just a few acknowledgements. Obviously, I want to thank my son, Kion, for being such a wonderful son and an inspiration to everyone around him. But I also want to thank all families affected by Alström. The board of AS UK and our staff team are absolutely fabulous. The clinicians and researchers and NHS England that work with us, and all of our grant providers and supporters. And thank you to the conference organisers for inviting us to speak today. I'm only sorry that we can't be there in person, and that's a real shame for me as a patient representative, because we really welcome the opportunity to come together with industry researchers to be able to share about our conditions and to make those links and to collaborate with others. So these are my contact details. We are happy to help where we can. Please do get in touch, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you very much.